Here. Oops. Thank you so much to whoever started the recording. Welcome again for the benefit of those listening to the recording to Beyond Stoplights, Designing Assessments That Work. We are recording today. We've got a lot to cover. Please feel free to throw questions in the chat or unmute, and we will have opportunities for discussion. My name is Laura Smith, and I am a senior instructional designer at Citi. Peg, you want to introduce yourself? Oh, you're muted, Peg.
Yep, I saw that. I'm Peg Checky. I'm also a senior instructional designer with Citi. Happy to be here. Looking forward to sharing insights and robust discussion.
All
Emily?
right. Yep. And I'm Emily Rush. I'm the university's AI education specialist, and I'm also AI discipline director for the medical college.
Great. Thank you both, Peg and Emily. Okay, here are our learning objectives for today. We will identify how generative AI challenges traditional assessment approaches and why tool restriction policies alone are insufficient. We will distinguish between the two-lane framework's complementary assessment approaches and applied decision criteria for each lane. We will evaluate your current assessments, or if you don't have them, that's fine. We'll have a couple of example assessments to walk through the two-lane approach using a decision tree. And we will discuss, I will discuss transparent AI policies and how to apply specifically the TILT framework to this approach. So it's our hope that you'll leave with a greater understanding of the problem and to be empowered to make decisions that work for you in your given context. So we'd like to begin with a discussion, a very general discussion to get us talking about AI or assessments in the age of AI. Feel free to put in the chat or verbally how you are currently addressing AI relative to your assessments. Anyone want to kick us off?
And silence reigned.
I'll give them a second. That's a big question. It takes time. Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, so I teach in the Health Systems Management graduate program, and my core course is Leadership in a Changing Health System. And the main focus in terms of addressing AI is the bulk of my assignments are application assignments, and they involve lived experience. And so this is a way that hopefully makes it both more enriching, but also less of a payoff to rely on AI tools in creating responses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
thank
Jennifer
you.
said that she's using using AI in individualized and personal assessments. Do you want to tell us more about that, Jennifer?
Yeah, similar to what Andrew just said, a lot of the, if they're discussion questions, they need to be based on personal experience, or they're more just individualized to the person and would be difficult to use AI to come up with something.
And
Julianne, say impossible though, just difficult.
And you're using AI. Are you using it for any assessments at all, Julianne? Like to create your assessments or to?
No, I have not. Only really so far for creating slides and lectures and outlines. So I'm interested in using it for assessments.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Hopefully you'll get some more ideas and a path to move forward, some ideas of how to move forward with what we're addressing today in the workshop. Yes, Andrew?
So thank you. I just was speaking before about my anxieties about AI interfering with the learning process. I should also add, there's a faculty member in HSM, Steve Whitekin, who is helping me develop a chatbot exercise, which, if it works as planned, would actually be a big improvement over the way that we currently do some of the assessments around interactions. So more to say about that probably in another month or so. Thank you.
Well, that's very exciting to hear. We'd love to hear more about how that turns out for you all in your program.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I guess I am. We have used AI. I'm on a national team trying to devise a new clinical tool to assess nurse practitioner students in clinicals, their clinical skills, behaviors, and everything. So we are doing that and we are presenting it now, but it's not really with my rush work. So we did use AI to try and put in all those competencies and then come up with more of a new tool to assess students real time in clinicals.
That's great. That's exciting to hear, Julianne.
We've come a long way from the November of 2022. I think the key, I mean, was it 22 or 23? I can't remember now. 22. Um, but yeah, as a faculty, think back to where you were just 3 short years ago and think about how you are looking at things now. And Emily, I think it helps if you jump in at this point and talk about our wicked problem.
All right, I'll do that. Okay, so I just want to contextualize. So, as the university's AI education specialist, I frequently describe where we're at in terms of AI at the university as a type of AI gray zone. So, we're in a space where, at least nationally, survey data varies, but what I looked at this morning said that by most counts, student AI use nationally is widespread, hovering around 90%. We're also in a space where expectations around AI use in disciplines and courses is still forming, and a place where institutional infrastructure is still developing. So it's within this context that I want to start by naming the lens that we're using to discuss assessment in today's workshop, and that lens is the wicked problems. Right, so here we're drawing on the work of Corbin et al., who treat AI as a wicked problem, not just because it's complicated, but because it behaves differently than other kinds of problems in higher education. So as you see on the left, some problems might be described as tame in the sense that they're clearly defined. We can sort of solve them once and be done with them. And with the right tool or rule, we can come up with a solution. AI, unfortunately, does not fall into that category, and thus we're describing it as a wicked problem in the sense that it can't be definitively solved. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but there are better or worse responses, and we'll talk a little bit about what those might entail later on. And the solution is variable because the situation in which we find ourselves is constantly changing due to technology, student uses, and professional expectations. So I think part of what we want to emphasize, and Peg and Laura jump in if I'm misspeaking, is that the goal of this workshop isn't to try and find the single solution to AI and assessment. It's thinking about how do we make thoughtful, defensible assessment decisions in a situation that doesn't fully settle. Now, I also want to say my goal in saying all this is not to make you throw your hands up in the air in despair and say there is no point, but rather what we hope that this framing or this lens will do will help us think about what is within the zone of our control. And so how can we think about the aspects of assessment that we can influence, and what are some aspects that are beyond our control that we might need to loosen our grip on, we'll say. All right, next slide, please. So continuing just for a moment with this idea of AI and assessment as a wicked problem, if we accept this premise, then there are a few implications that follow. So first, attempting to future-proof assessments misunderstands the problem type. This is something that we talk a lot about in 2022, 2023, but unless you are offering an assessment in a completely controlled environment, quote, future-proofing AI assessments or assessments in light of AI is extremely difficult. As such, we suggest that assessment choices often involve trade-offs in terms of what are some choices that we value or choose to prioritize while maybe letting go of other choices. Thirdly, within this lens, we want to say that assessment decisions can't be fully delegated to tools or policies. Similarly, enforcement tools like detection software or stoplights, and we'll say a little bit more about what we mean by stoplights very shortly, often misdiagnose AI as a tame problem or something that can be easily regulated. So I think the gist of what we want to relay going forward is thinking about AI as a wicked problem, and as such, thinking about assessments as something that will require ongoing context sensitive and professional judgment. And I think I'll hand it over to Peg.
Tag, I'm it. We've already kind of talked about the state of AI in assessment, and essentially, I mean, students are already digital natives. They've been digital natives since the advent of the internet, 40 years ago or whatever it was now. Look at how fast they adapted to the internet itself, right? Go back to the days of Internet Explorer, the first one. I think that was the first one that was publicly available, right? And we all said, oh no, the world is ending. Go back to chalk if you want to. And oh no, the world is ending. It's already been that. It's only been 4 years though. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, this stuff is going to be either we're going to be uh, uh, either we're going to have adapted to it or not. But it's not going away. As we mentioned with the last workshop that we did, I think that was Emily and I. AI agents can already complete your coursework independently. I don't know if everybody at this workshop attended that workshop. If you didn't, I can upload or I can go into a chat GPT browser and just say, can you do these things for me? And it will do them. And it will look like I did them. And they'll submit assignments and it will look great and it will sound great. And so, as Emily said, we don't want to make people throw up their hands and say, what's the point? But there is an element of that going on. We've talked about so much in the past that AI tools are unreliable and absolutely do harm, right? Do not lean into AI detection tools as the end all be all savior because they're not. They have false positives, there's bias involved, they incorrectly flag all kinds of academic research and writing. We know that. And what else do we do here? I mean, we're not exactly writing fictional prose. And then at the end of the day, the biggest point for me as an educator is that policing and tracking, I am so annoyed with everything I have to track right now. I can't even imagine you guys. It's bad enough as clinicians where you have to track every interaction and you have AI in the room and all that. Now you're supposed to do it with your students too, and that's just not unsustainable. My question is always, do I want to spend time playing cat and mouse, tracking them down, figuring out who's lying and who's not? Or do I want to just spend my time teaching and those that get it, get it. Those that don't will fail, and that's how it's supposed to work. Next slide, please. Oh, Mozilla Netscape, Andrew. Um, when we talk about, what do we do? How do we move forward? Really, it comes down to the basics. It goes back to everything that we've always done. Skilling and drilling never loses its importance. It never loses its place in the teaching hierarchy. I love the term eustress. I just learned it last night. Did you guys know that term? Maybe it's just new to me, but it refers to the educational tension itself, the struggle and the practice and the hard work. As you move from a novice into an expert, if I'm not frustrating you as a teacher, I'm not doing my job. Like I used to tell my students all the time that if they didn't leave my class with at least a little bit of frustration, I would have feel that I wasn't challenging them enough. And then I would balance that with giving them the reward of figuring it out, right? That's their reward. It's not my reward. It's their reward. They get to learn. They get to figure it out. They get to really enjoy that moment of huzzah. I learned something. It's clicking. It's coming to fruition. And obviously, faculty being essential is key to all of it. You are the ones that are doing all this. So those are the pieces that we know. When we go to the motivational piece, theoretically, we all know that motivation matters. When it comes to our assessments, how do we apply that motivational spin? We need to actually look at our assessments as more than just a test. Oh, we need to give them this multiple choice exam because that's what they're going to get when they go for their boards. Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. Nothing can be said against that. However, is that the best way to learn nowadays? Maybe, maybe not. The landscape has shifted so dramatically that it's entirely possible that it doesn't matter what kind of test you give them, multiple choice, essay, oral, is that really how we want to assess our students? Is it meaningful, valuable, achievable? Does it deepen understanding? Does it foster their growth as professionals? Remember that the end result of everything that we do is to create professionals who are going to go out in the world and mirror and perform their jobs and mirror the expertise that they learned at Rush. Is it boosting engagement? Is it boosting retention of information? Does it make the student feel good when they've learned? Those are things that they have to learn. At the same time, the assessments that we use now tend to cause too much pressure. I mean, we've all heard about those students who are crying in the stairwells because, they might have gotten a question wrong on an exam. That's too much stress. Nobody is learning when there's that much stress. Okay, they might be memorizing for the exam, but they're not internalizing the information because high distress absolutely hinders concentration, memory retrieval, and overall cognitive function. We know that. We know it through and through. So, next slide, please. We want to make sure that we figure out a way to ensure that students have mastered the foundational skills. We need to design assessments that are able to reliably evaluate knowledge acquisition and comprehension. And I love this quote. I didn't find it. I have to give full credit to Laura. If we do not change our assessments to align them with the capabilities of generative AI, our degrees will be easier to pass, and we will have failed to prepare our students for the future. And that's from Adam Bridgman, Ruth Weeks, and Danny Liu, aligning our assessments to the age of generative AI. How many of you are like, does it make sense? Like, how are you reacting to that reality? Can I take a second and pause?
Yeah, it's scary. Just thinking that someone could be a practicing nurse or a healthcare professional, or anyone who is out here, in the public arena, especially, I mean, for us as nurses, taking care of patients, and they barely came through. Now, we know that NCLEX exams should catch them up. So even if they pass through our programs, the NCLEX should catch it. But some people are just very good test takers, and that's just always been the case. I can remember having a student, she graduated, but she plagiarized, and she got the zero on the course. This wasn't here, but somewhere else. And then years later, I don't even work for that place anymore, but my son is in the emergency room, and with a febrile um, seizure from high temperature. And she walks in the room, and my mouth opens up, and she walks right back out. Because it was like, and I was thinking, oh no, not today. This is not even happening. Because it's that I'm afraid that that's what will happen. No one else knows, but she knew that I knew, and so it's just scary.
Well, and that's why we have to be so resilient and creative and open to new ideas about how we're doing things now because everything has shifted. So, to that end, I pass it off to Laura to discuss some of this. I proposed the questions. She's going to propose the solutions.
I was going to say real quick, Peg, if I can interrupt.
Sorry, Julianne, go
I
ahead.
have noticed recently that some students are really struggling when we evaluate them in an OSCE, which is in the clinical setting, right? And I couldn't really put my finger on it, but that last slide made me think that if they're kind of skating through the pathophys and the physiology and they're doing these assignments and then they get to clinical and I noticed like a difference in their critical thinking skills.
Interesting.
And so that is, I couldn't put my finger on why they are struggling, whether it was COVID, what other factors, but it may indeed be that they're not getting that foundational knowledge before they're asked to do those clinical skills and behaviors. So I think it's going to be really important to us, again, to start at the end and say, what is a practice-ready practitioner? What do we need to see in them live? And then go backwards. And then I don't know, but I don't have all the answers. So I'm hoping you're going to help because they don't know how to get there.
You on that, Julianne? That's so beautifully put.
Yeah, truly, and that is one of the reasons why standards-based education, which you guys are working so hard on to implement right now, that's one of the reasons why that's going to become so important down the road, because it is going to be based more on the, you either reach the standard or you don't. Right. But there are problems with that too, which we'll talk about in another workshop. Laura, tag, you're it.
Great. So we're going to be talking for a bit about popular solutions in AI and assessment, some of the capabilities and limitations of these solutions, and then we'll move on to the focus of our workshop, which is the two-lane approach. So as you've probably all seen, when generative AI starts showing up in student work, many institutions and instructors have responded by trying to be very explicit about acceptable use. And that's where we see approaches like the ones you see here, the stoplight models, for example, and the AI assessment scale, where we see other sort of declarative, sort of discursive policies that describe AI use in terms of levels or scales, right? So in practice, these usually takes the form of statements like, and I've boxed off one here, hopefully you can see it. You may use AI for planning, idea development, and research. Your final submission should show how you have developed and refined these ideas. Or you may use AI for brainstorming, but not for drafting. AI is allowed for planning, but the final submission may be your own, for example. So some of these versions get very granular and they break assignments into stages, right? Planning, drafting, revising, and assigning different AI permissions to each stage. And these approaches, I agree, are appealing, right? They feel concrete, they feel comforting, because they rely on familiar metaphors, right? Stoplights, scales, and they give students rules and faculty language for how to articulate acceptable AI use. And they create a sense that AI is being managed thoughtfully and transparently with an assignment or a syllabus. But they also share some common features. They're typically articulated at the course or assignment level, and they heavily depend on student compliance through students accurately reporting how they used AI to complete the assessment. And they assume that we can meaningfully distinguish between human and AI contribution after the fact, though we know that that is endlessly challenging and nearly impossible to do given that detection tools are unreliable. So in other words, these kinds of approaches focus on specifying behavior, not on changing the underlying structure of the assignment or assessment. And as AI tools become more integrated and less visible, that distinction becomes harder and harder to enforce in practice. And we've all seen that, right, on our own. And the uncertainty that can emerge from this practice, as we've all seen too, can lead to student confusion, ambiguity, and in worst case, could contribute to distrust. If students aren't aware to what extent they can use an AI tool to perform what action, especially if AI is so fully integrated into the process, students are left questioning, and therefore you can lead to a sense of confusion and distrust in the experience. So the question becomes not whether these approaches are well intentioned, because they are, but whether or not they're sufficient for producing evidence of learning that we can actually trust. So, for example, as we've already posed, how effective is a scaled approach such as this when acceptable use can't be reliably detected or measured? And then, if we can't count on our assessments to reliably measure student learning, are we eroding the value of learning? And this really brings us to the core problem. What brings us to, if our assessment, if AI use can't be reliably detected or measured, what are our assessments actually telling us about student learning, right? And that's the distinction we're highlighting here, as I've shown with this visual here. The gap between what we can specify in a policy or in guidelines or whatever, and what we can actually verify through assessment design. And this is why many researchers argue that we need a structural shift away from trying to control tools or trying to discursively articulate the limits of how these tools can be used, and toward designing assessments that make clear, defensible claims about learning. And this is why we're going to move on to look at the two-lane approach, which discusses this more as an assessment of validity problem and not a tech problem, for example. So here are the details of the two-lane approach that we'll be focusing more on this through the rest of this workshop, in terms of what it is, how we can use it to evaluate our existing assessments, and we'll also be opening up to you to discuss the feasibility of using this approach in your own context. So the two-lane approach starts from a simple idea. So one assessment can't reliably do two different jobs at the same time. And the framework was originally developed by faculty and researchers at the University of Sydney in 2024, Adam Bridgman, Ruth Weeks, and Danny Liu, who we've already referred to earlier with that quote in the presentation, which is why you see some, sort of unfamiliar verbiage in the framework or the table reproduced here, such as TEXA, which is essentially Australia's sort of higher education quality assurance and accreditation body. So be mindful of that this was introduced in that context, and then we would have to, of course, then apply it to our own particular context. So the framework, as you can see in this table, was originally envisioned as a program level change. So the idea is that programs, not individual assignments, need to ensure that there are clear moments where students practice with support, and clear moments where we verify independent mastery. And it's binary by design. So on the for example, on the left, you see secure or lane one assessments. Lane one assessments are used to identify when we need to verify independent mastery. So these are the moments where we have to be confident that a student can perform on their own. So the conditions are controlled, external tools aren't necessarily part of the task or aren't typically. These could include oral assessments, as you see in the examples below, in-class written assessments, monitored simulations, individual or group, etc. Whereas lane two assessments are used when the goal is to develop skills and professional judgment. So these are open, practice-oriented tasks where students learn by using time, resources, tools, which includes AI. And it should be said that AI use cannot be prohibited in lane two because, again, of the issue with reliability. So examples can include any number of assignments that you can imagine where students are working with external tools, resources to support their development, such as research papers, individual and group projects, other types of formative and summative assessments. So the framework isn't about banning or embracing AI. It's about sort of being honest about what each assessment can actually claim and making sure that programs have both kinds of evidence integrated into their program design. Benefits of the two-lane approach, and there are many. And I think one of the main benefits, personally as faculty member and also as an instructional designer, is that it's liberating. And in fact, I believe it's empowering for the faculty. So it ensures reliable assessment practices. It rids you of the burden of having to endlessly track and police prohibited AI use, reduces confusion among students regarding what AI use is allowed and when, and it's flexible, right? So it can be adapted to different course modalities. I will say that, it is challenging, and this is something we need to acknowledge, that in purely asynchronous courses, the two-lane approach is difficult and must be done in tandem with other program level outcomes and design. But I do think it empowers faculty to make assessment decisions aligned with their learning objectives and also impact assessment decisions that are done at the program level. And when incorporating this approach, you do not have to reinvent the wheel, right? It has a potential for incorporation into existing assessment structure at the course level. And as we've been talking all along, it really does reinforce best practice in teaching and learning. And this is something that Emily will introduce us to in a moment in terms of transparency, but also assignment scaffolding and other best practices.
Does anybody have any questions at this point before we move into the next
Apologies,
section?
I've been talking a lot. So if you have questions, comments, please feel free to throw them in the chat or share them verbally. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Emily.
All right, thanks, Laura. So what I want to do is build upon the two-lane approach a little bit and talk about how lane decisions can become visible in our course design process and transparent to students. So this is also circling back to the idea of why AI in assessments is a wicked problem. And if we accept that, this means that clarity might matter more than control. And Laura's already talked about this a little bit, as has Peg. So clarity matters in the sense that, as we said, we can't necessarily rely on enforcement or detection to resolve uncertainty. So what we need to do is be explicit about what we're asking students to do, and particularly why. And so this is where we want to introduce the TILT framework. So this is transparency in assessment design, or TILT. And what I'd like to suggest here is TILT isn't just a teaching strategy, but it's part of how we set expectations and protect assessment integrity when certainty isn't available. And this is sort of a high-level overview, just as sort of a look ahead. Laura and I will actually be doing a more comprehensive workshop on TILT in the spring, I think in March. So some steps that we can take to bring transparency and clarity when certainty is not necessarily an option are the following. So first of all, thinking about what is the purpose of your assessment. So what we might want to do is think about what learning outcome the assessment is claiming and whether or not it requires independent demonstration, which would fall under that lane one that Laura described just a minute ago. Or is it perhaps open to the use of demonstrating development or support, so falling more into lane 2. Once we've determined that, we might start thinking about what are the tasks involved in the assessment. So what do students need to do? Is there a place where AI would, on the one hand, does it undermine aspects of the desired learning outcomes, or is it possible that AI might actually support the purpose of assessment? So then we might consider that. And the third step, we want to then think about what are the criteria for success. So what counts as evidence of success? Does it necessitate independent mastery of a concept or skill? Or is it possible that success might be supported by the use of AI augmented work, or a clearly defined and likely segmented combination of independent work and AI augmented work? And the fourth part then is, once we've thought about all these aspects of how we try to get clarity when certainty isn't necessarily possible, is how do we present this to our students? And this is a key point just in terms of setting expectations. So if if anything falls outside of line 1, how do we talk to students about expectations regarding AI use? And a key point might not be just talking about AI use, but especially I think modeling what is appropriate disciplinary use of AI in your context or course specific use to really guide them in terms of what you think are best practices. That would align with that lane choice decision. So does this assessment fall into lane 1 or lane 2? And what does academic integrity entail in that particular context, and how do we clarify it to our students? All right, and with that, I think I'm going to hand it off to Peg.
Okay. Did anybody happen to bring an assessment? I know that we talked about, or when we sent out the invitation, we suggested that people could bring an assessment with them. Did anybody bring one that they want to look at? And with that, I'm going to say, I think not. Do you guys know the joke? Rene Descartes walks into a bar. The bartender asks him if he wants a drink. He says, I think not. And I'll leave you with that. Anyway, my ADHD is obviously pinging today. One of the things we talk about, and Marty brought this up, the approach with synchronous versus asynchronous. We're going to talk about that, but one of the things to think about even before you get there is to figure out how to choose your lane. So with any assessment, I was hoping somebody would bring one, but if you didn't, just imagine that there's an assessment out there. The first thing you want to do is look at the purpose and claim, like Emily just talked about. And one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet is the importance of mapping those assessments back to their objectives. Be honest. I'm going to put y'all in the spot. How many of you know to map your assessments back to the learning objectives within your weekly course objectives, within your course objectives, but also back to the program objectives? Who among us does that with every single assessment that we create? Show of hands. Tamika does. Anybody else? I will say, I mean, maybe I'm outing myself, but as an educator, I didn't know I needed to do that until probably 10 years into my educational journey, because I didn't know it was a thing, because nobody taught me to teach. I learned how to teach on the fly because somebody put me in in front of a bunch of students and said, here, teach this. Marima says, yeah, I do it with Bronca's help. And that's, yes, of course. The point is, many of us don't know all. I didn't even know about learning objectives until until I actually got into instructional design as a faculty member. Went right over my head. Never made those connections. Makes me a bad faculty member, I know. I've come a long way since my early days. The point is, mapping back to objectives and alignment, it's something that we've discussed a lot before, but without making those mappings, you don't really even know what the purpose of the assessment is. Once you've got the assessment ready to go, you ask yourself, is it intended to verify independent mastery of a skill, or is it meant to develop the skill? And clearly, if it's meant to verify something, you want to have a secure assessment opportunity somehow, somewhere. If it's meant to develop the skill, you can have the possibility of leaving it open, and you should expect students to use AI. Laura had a really great analogy. I'm going to just reference it briefly, and because it's quoted in the lane 2 of healthy AI versus unhealthy AI. There's a way to use AI responsibly and respectfully and ethically, and we have talked about that at length. The problem is that students, if I'm busy and I'm stressed and I'm trying to meet a deadline and I'm racing down the road in my car, I am not gonna stop in for a meal at Alinea, right? I don't want a dining experience. I want fuel. So I'm gonna just inhale. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Taco Bell, whatever. Ugh. as bad as I know that is for me, there are times when I have done it because I'm in a crunch, I'm in a jam. So many of our students think of these things as impending doom that they're going to have that feeling of stress. They're going to tend to go that direction. So healthy AI versus unhealthy AI is what I think we were talking about there. Let's skip into some examples. Does anybody have any questions up to this point? Okay, so let's look at scenario one. Professor Johnson presents a lecture on postpartum care and complications. Julianne, I think we took this one from you. And then assigns a patient case as a graded group assignment in Canvas. In 1 week, students work together to draft a care plan and share their clinical reasoning in a discussion forum. No AI guidance is provided. Is this assessment intended to verify independent mastery or develop the skill? I'm asking, it's not rhetorical. What do you guys think? I'm going to say developing the skill. Would I be right? Yes. And Ramona came in the chat, and Andrew came in the chat. Thanks for playing, guys. So clearly it's developing the skill, right? Because that they're all talking about it and they're all working together, and it's not a secure assessment. So it's presumed that they're going to use AI, right? You, the key point though is because it's development, because it's not end all be all, they need to know it or the patient dies. It's probably okay for them to use AI for that. When it's not okay for them to use AI would be in the next scenario.
Yeah, and I should say, sorry, I don't mean to jump in here, Peg,
No,
but
do.
just in the lane two recommendations, right? AI use cannot be prohibited, is what we've said, but also that modeling is key, right? If we
Yeah.
assume that students are going to be using it, then we need to model appropriate use for them, knowing that healthy choices are likely, or and unhealthy choices are both likely, right? But we're suggesting in ways that AI can be appropriately used, knowing that we can't necessarily determine whether or not they're making the right choices, right? In that particular assignment. Yep.
And Jennifer brings up the great point. If they're using AI, then they're not practicing retrieval of information. Won't this hinder retention? I would argue that, yeah, they are still practicing retrieval of information in a sense. It's a different way of retrieving information. But if I take the time to work with an AI to identify the problem, I'm going to have to read the output. So that's retrieval of information, right? There's multiple layers, and if I'm a faculty member and I ask the student to reflect on the process that they use, that's good. That's a good telling point too. So there are, it's as Emily says, what we hope we might be able to do in the future is to develop AI simulations that allow interactions, low stake ways to work through cases. We're not there yet, but it's all part of the process. So just remember that it's not the end all be all if it's still in a class session. Like we really want to distinguish between developing the information and internalizing the information versus verifying that they have already done so. One is done throughout the course, one is done theoretically, I would presume, at the end. You can do a lot more formative assessment throughout to build up to that last summative that's so important.
Yeah. And as we said before, lane two assessments can also be summative, right? We're not saying that summative assessment has to occur only in the lane one context. And that is a way that I think that this framework can be adaptable to asynchronous courses in which there are opportunities for secure assessment in the program. And Ramona, question, what is the difference if the student is using Dr. Google and using AI? What do you guys had any response? Emily, it looks like you replied to Ramona in the chat. I mean, I think in any circumstance where we're talking about use of external tools, right, that's where your expertise as faculty comes in, right? Because you are modeling appropriate use, what the tool can and can't do well, identifying hallucinations or inaccuracies, and guiding them through that process, right? Where they through yours and the students' evolving AI literacies, you're understanding the capabilities and limitations of these tools and learning how to use them appropriately in your given context, educationally, and in your future, in their future profession.
And I think, Ramona, I think I would answer that question by saying that at the end of the day, what does it matter? Like, I use this argument a lot. Like, okay, I have culinary as my background in teaching, so I have to use culinary examples as opposed to medical examples because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician. My understanding of your lives and your roles is somewhat limited. However, learning is learning, and one of the things that I learned as I was teaching in the culinary world was that at the end of the day, I don't care how they learn their knife cuts as long as they learn the right ones. And so my job as their teacher was not to get inside their heads and figure out, okay, well, where are you learning? Are you learning Larousse's knife cuts or are you learning Jacques Pepin's knife cuts? Because no, there's one standard and they learn it and they show it to me by making those knife cuts. Does that help at all, Ramona?
Yes, that does make sense. And I asked the question because and I'm still learning about all the tools of AI myself, but it just seems like right before AI became so intense that everybody was consulting Dr. Google for everything, and so that's why I said, well, I don't see it much of a difference myself. That's why I asked the question.
I think
Uh,
the difference between the two is okay, so Google is going out and just getting resources for people to look at, whereas AI is taking those same resources that Google has gathered. AI takes those resources and analyzes them for the student and says that and responds to questions based on what those resources tell them. So AI takes Dr. Google a step further, if you will, because if anybody wants to jump in at this point and redirect or whatever, please feel free. But I guess I would explain it that AI takes Dr. Google to the next level because AI can explain the resources, not just present the resources.
and Peg, I 100% agree with you because even for when the times that I use AI, because I use AI, I've learned
Mhm.
that they they do a great job of putting it all together in ways that I never could. So I agree with you 100%.
Well, and I
Right.
should
And
also add that AI is producing novel content, right? It's
yeah,
not right through you know pattern recognition. So it's working in a different way than a search engine is. I want to, since we only have 9 minutes, is it okay if we move ahead?
I think we should.
Okay. All right, thanks. So we have one more decision tree. I think this one will be obvious to you all, but we have Professor Johnson wants to assess clinical readiness on postpartum patient care, developing a simulation lab or an OSCE station on postpartum hemorrhage. Is this assessment intended to verify independent mastery or develop the skill? In this case, and I'll answer it for you for the sake of time, we have verification needed. So in this case, the assessment should demonstrate that the acute students can independently recognize and respond to postpartum complications under pressure using their own clinical judgment and without external support, such as AI tools, right? So the assessment must be secure. And like though in lane 2, Professor Johnson uses the TILT framework to update the assessment guidelines, communicating purpose, evaluation criteria, et cetera. And students are reminded, right, of previous formative assessments on the topic and encouraged to review feedback in preparation, right? And those formative assessments were likely in the lane 2 path, right? So in that case, it's a scaffolded assignment, right? And we'll talk a bit more about that now. So what you can start doing now deploy the AI literacy module in your course. We have, in fact, we're in the process of making some updates to that for a health sciences context. Learn about what AI is capable of yourself. Develop your own AI literacy. And as Emily said, accept that this is a wicked problem. I like to say wicked, right? There's something about that word that makes you want to say it in a particular way. And solutions may vary. And this includes modeling appropriate use, offering choice. And we haven't really talked about accessibility and inclusivity in this context, but it is very important, right? Some students may opt not to use AI, in which case you may want to offer alternatives. Articulating the purpose, why we are doing it this way, be transparent. Revise your assessment instructions to include AI options if appropriate, scaffolding your assessments as relevant, and exploring secure assessment options at Rush. And in fact, in a couple weeks, we have a workshop on that very topic. So we'll have the date and time and other related workshops toward the end of the slide deck. But this is, of course, a marathon, not a sprint, right? These are evolving things that are incremental steps that you can take to be mindful of the challenges of assessment in the age of AI. So we have about 6 minutes left for discussion. Thanks, Ramona. Thanks so much for showing up. A few questions that we'd love to hear your thoughts. We understand there are some challenges here. Again, this is a wicked problem, right? So what do you think about this? How feasible is it for your given context? What feels right about it? What scares you? What do you need to be successful? And how can City help you support that? Andrew.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. I think the two lanes make a lot of intuitive sense to me. What it's raised for me a little bit is the relationship between the course that I teach and the broader assessment of learning of students as graduates of the program. One of the things I struggle with a little bit, at a micro level. So I've got assessments that I feel like are pretty robust to, like, even if students use AI, it's going to need to be an enabler. It's not going to replace learning. But I do have some assessments. They're relatively minor. They're weekly, and they're more like checks on reading. It's just to make sure. It's like a little bit of an accountability step to make sure people take a look at the stuff that's assigned. Those, I think, have some real vulnerability to the use of AI in ways that interfere with what I'm intending, to the point where I almost wonder, should I just abandon them completely? They don't really fit the definition of, they need to be lockdown assessments, I don't think, but they are the kind of thing where I would hope that at a minimum, and this is the guidance I gave students, which might be naive on my part, but I said if you're going to use AI, best practice would be to come up with your own answer first, and then see if AI agrees with you. So at least there's, I think, to the earlier point, some retrieval taking place and some planned reasoning. But anyway, I'd be interested in any thoughts about that. That's sort of that micro knowledge or reading check, if you will. Whether there's an approach I should think about that looks different, or should I abandon it entirely, or you don't have a perspective, either way is fine too. But again, thank you very much for this today.
And I was going
I'm
to
a
say,
firm believer in not abandoning assessment just because it's inconvenient or challenging. I mean, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing. But I'm a firm believer in, I want to assess my students throughout my course. And as long as they're showing improvement, and as long as they're showing, a track of progression through the course, then I feel like they're probably doing what they need to be doing. And you can always tell when you talk to them. I'm presuming that, especially for those people that have face-to-face classes or even remote classes, that at some point, you either email or talk or check in somehow with your students.
I mean, I was going to say, like Andrew brought up, I do have a hard time assessing whether the students have fully done their reading, and the books are dense, right? And the content is very important for their learning. I haven't done a check-in like he suggested on the reading, but yeah, I don't know. I can tell sometimes when speaking to students whether they have, but you don't speak to all of them with online coursework. And so I don't have a good idea of who really is keeping up with the material and who isn't until maybe they take that first exam, which we have multiple choice to prepare them for their boards. But we do have some discussion pieces too, but you can use AI to write those. So I am having some challenges trying to figure out who actually is doing the work and learning the material well and who is not. So I agree with him. It's challenging now.
I'm wondering, Julianne, whether it's possible to add in some small group discussion in some Zoom discussion or well, I mean, that takes away from, because you can never get everybody to meet in person. I'm just trying to think of ways that you can touch base with them before those all important exams hit.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. So Branka just said, the flipped classroom.
Yeah.
So the flipped classroom, I think, works when you more have like synchronous classes. Whereas with asynchronous, it's hard because all of our nurses are, working different shifts as professionals. So that's challenging too, because the flipped classroom, to my idea, is you have them read it, you come to class, and then you discuss it all. But I don't know how you do that with a online program.
You can still have them read it and perform tasks and then discuss it after the fact. It's not just reading that they can do ahead of time.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
can I just give you an idea of how we model this? And yes, this is a mostly in-person class, but they do have some lab sessions also during this term. What they're doing is, so those weeks that they're in lab, she wanted them to concentrate more on their lab work, but still they obviously needed the content for the week, and she needed to make sure that they learned this content before they went into lab for the week. So what I did is we went in, they created their lectures in PowerPoint, but we threw in questions along the video or inside the video where they were graded on this stuff too. So they were graded on these components to ensure that they were going through the material of the lecture, because it's really important for them to get what was in this lecture because they were going to need it for lab. But then we also opened up the module, I'm sorry, in sequence, right? So they had to go in and we had requirements for each of the modules. And this also ensured that they, obviously, depending on how you put these requirements in, some of them are just like, view only. But this at least gave the faculty an idea that they at least at some point touched on it, right? Maybe they didn't necessarily read it all, but they were still accountable. So they could go back and say, well, you were in this module, you should have read all the materials that we had this information for you to have. And then we incorporated, okay, you had to go through this in sequence, and then they got to see what the activity was for the week in classroom. So it all built on their assignment, or their learning built on what their activity was going to be for the week. And then once we opened up the activity, they came into classroom, and then we had the interaction component, the interactive. So they weren't lecturing during class, and they also had that lab component for the week, sorry. So it was classroom and one lab for that week, so that they had all of the material, and this kind of ensured that they were getting all the necessary material that they needed for the week in lab. I am going to do a workshop with this faculty coming up, so that she can give you her approach and why they did this in a little more detail on it. But so far, it seems like it's working for them, and the students are learning their skills before they head out into lab.
Yeah, I think something you said kind of prompted me to think maybe embedding questions within the lecture instead of putting all of the questions separately. So then that they're engaging with that material and maybe engaging, putting those questions like throughout where it pops up or something within the lecture so that they can't just go to the questions and answer them without even interacting with the material might be something.
Here's where I would slow you down though, Julianne, because I'm telling you that I'm exactly that student. I would get the anytime I'm faced with something in a video, I immediately look, and you can hide them as a faculty member, right? That's important. But know that there are students out there like me. I don't have the patience to listen to somebody else talk for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I don't. So I blast through.
Oh,
I
yeah.
get
Well, no, right. And that was a concern, Peg. So what we did when we used Panopto, so we enabled certain settings where they were not able to backtrack or move fast
exactly.
forward. And we chunked it. So obviously they're not going to sit through an
Right.
hour, right? So we
Right.
chunked the video too, so that it's
That's
more manageable for them, that they can
That's what
watch
we
it.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we don't
So
make anything more than 15, 20 minutes now
That's
about any
exactly.
topic. Yeah,
yeah.
But
right.
So
there's still quite a number of faculty that are big into the long lectures. And that's
Yeah.
where, again, that's where that changing perspective that Laura brought up in the beginning of the presentation, that's where that's so important. We are after time.
Yeah,
Andy, I don't know.
and looks like Andrew has his hand raised also.
Thank you. Just really quickly, if there's been a session previously on the use of Panopto and the inclusion of questions and the approach that you're talking about, Branka, and like best practices on that, if somebody could shoot that to me, I'd be grateful. I want to explore that. Thank you.
We also,
yes,
Canvas has the same capabilities as well. So another option out there.
Yeah,
There's just,
the studio, but yeah.
yeah.
We'll go through that. And like Peg said, there were, but Panopto for this particular use, what the faculty really wanted to happen while they were watching Panopto was the best tool. Not that I'm saying Studio is, but no, I'm sorry, Andrew. We have not had anything yet so far. This is upcoming, I think in March, this workshop that we're working. I'm starting to prepare with the faculty because I wanted to give it some time because we did this in the fall term. So I wanted to give it some time, to get some of the feedback and all of that from the faculty and students before we did the workshop. So coming in March, keep an eye out and we will have one coming up with the faculty.
Terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks all. Really interesting. Just since we are about 5 minutes over time, I just wanted to wrap it up since we have a few folks still on the line. As you can see, here are the upcoming related workshops. We mentioned the one on secure assessments happening, I believe, on Friday, January 23rd. I believe that's Daniel and Branka, correct? Prompt engineering for educators with Peg and Branka, and transparency in learning and teaching tilt in the age of Gen AI with Emily and myself. And here are our references. We will share a copy of the deck with you all. If you all would take a moment, we'll also put that in the follow-up email to complete this exit ticket. And as always, please reach out if you have questions, if you need help with this. Again, this is a wicked problem, right? So it's a lot of our issues are thorny, and we need to look at it solutions from a number of perspectives. So we appreciate your particular examples and look forward to working with you on others. Thank you all for coming.